Are you a little confused about how invisibility works in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons? Do you think that just because you're invisible, you could just run amok all around the adventure, just doing whatever you want unseen? Understanding invisibility in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition can be a little tricky, so today we're going to break it down and figure it out. Come on, adventurers! Now, I saw a lot of questions on social media about how invisibility works, and boy, am I glad that I did some research for this video. I learned a lot about creeping around unseen in this game and what it allows you to do and what it doesn't. This was quite a learning experience for me too. I've honestly never played a character that had invisibility, and I don't think I've ever dungeon mastered a game where my players had invisibility either. Not yet, anyway. Now, I think it's pretty important to understand how invisibility works, no matter your level of expertise in Dungeons & Dragons. Even if you are a beginner, if you're playing with the starter set, the pre-generated wizard that's in here can actually get the invisibility spell once they level up. And if you're playing with the essentials kit and your players are making their own characters, the rules in here for the wizard and the bard both allow them access to the invisibility spell. If you're interested in either of these kits, I'll put a link in the description down below. And if you're just playing a different adventure or your own homebrew, it's still really important to understand how invisibility works. Now, there's a few ways for your character to go invisible. There are some different invisibility spells, plus there are some magic items in the Dungeons & Dragons world that grant invisibility as well. Let's go over them. Now, this is where I found it real handy to use the Arcane Spellbook cards and the magic item cards. I'll put links to both of those down in the description as well. Now, as far as spells, we have the invisibility spell, which you can tell from the back of the card is a 2nd level spell because it has the number 2 on it. The invisibility spell is available to your 3 main caster classes: Warlock, Wizard, and Sorcerer, as well as Bards and Artificers. The duration of the invisibility spell is a whole hour, but it's also a concentration spell. What this means is that if you cast any other concentration spell, this one will end, or if you take any damage, you'll have to likely make a saving throw to see if you can maintain the concentration. If from either of those means a concentration is lost, the spell will instantly end. Now, the description of this spell says a creature you touch becomes invisible until the spell ends. Anything the target is wearing or carrying is invisible as long as it's on that target's person. The spell ends for a target that attacks or casts a spell. So you're going to find that with almost all the spells and items that make someone invisible, if you're the invisible one and you cast another spell or you attack someone, it's going to make your invisibility end, and that's really important to remember. Now, the invisibility spell can also be cast at higher levels than 2nd to make additional creatures invisible. So as your character levels up, you can potentially make the whole party invisible with just one action. Now, we also have the greater invisibility spell. This is a 4th level spell, but it's only available to sorcerers, wizards, and bards. There's a big difference between invisibility and greater invisibility that's really important to know. While invisibility lasts a whole hour, greater invisibility only lasts 1 minute, but there's a big difference. You can still cast spells and make attacks with greater invisibility on you and not make the spell end. However, it is a concentration spell, so if the person that cast it casts another concentration spell, that will make it end. But you can run around in combat making all sorts of ranged or melee attacks or even spell attacks, and doesn't make your invisibility end, which is probably also why it only lasts a minute. In D&D combat rounds, that's probably going to be about 10 rounds of combat, since each one is about 6 seconds. Now, greater invisibility is also based on touch, and the description just says you or a creature you touch, so they have to be right next to you in order to cast it on someone else. And it doesn't give you the option of leveling it up and making multiple creatures invisible, like the whole party as you get stronger. It's literally just you or somebody else, and that's it. For spells, there's also the mislead spell. That is a 5th level spell that's only available to bards and wizards. Now the mislead spell, according to the card, the casting time is an action. It also can last up to an hour, and it's also concentration, but the range is only self. You can't cast it on anyone else, just yourself. What the spell does is it says you become invisible at the same time an illusory double of yourself appears where you're standing. The double lasts for the duration, but the invisibility does end if you attack or cast a spell. You can use your action to move your double up to twice your speed and make it gesture, speak, and behave in any manner you choose. And now you can use a bonus action to switch in between using your own eyes and ears and senses or using the double's eyes and ears and senses. But while you're using the doubles, you don't have any clue as to what's going on around you. You can't see what's around you, hear what's around you, only through the double. So this is pretty interesting too, because it actually allows you a double of yourself to move around while you are invisible to do something else. Now also, just sticking with the core rulebooks, there's also quite a few magic items which will make you invisible. This is another great way I like using these cards, because if I have the card in front of me, I'm not as likely to forget that I actually have it available to use. And a few of them have some really neat artwork on them. So first off, we have the Ring of Invisibility, and that says, while wearing this ring, you can turn invisible as an action. Anything you're wearing or carrying is invisible with you. You remain invisible until the ring is removed, or until you attack or cast a spell, or until you use a bonus action to become visible again. So you can keep the ring on and just use bonus actions to become invisible, uninvisible, visible. Next, we have a Potion of Invisibility. This says the potion's container looks empty but feels as though it holds liquid. When you drink it, you become invisible for 1 hour. Anything you wear or carry is invisible with you, but the effect does end early if you attack or cast a spell. But using these items, you don't have to worry about the concentration aspect of a spell, which is pretty neat. Next up is a really cool one, the Dust of Disappearance. This is found in a small packet, and it's a powder that resembles a very fine sand. There's enough in the jar for just one use. When you use an action to throw the dust in the air, you and each creature and object within 10 feet becomes invisible for 2d4 minutes. So this is only for between 2 minutes and 8 minutes. But it's anything within 10 feet that the dust gets on, so you have to be really careful you don't make any of your foes invisible too. The dust is consumed when its magic takes effect, so this is not something you can use multiple times, it's just a one-use only item. It also does say if a creature that's affected by the dust attacks or casts a spell, it ends early for that creature. So if you've used it to turn multiple beings invisible, if they cast a spell or make an attack, that one creature will become visible again. Lastly, we have a Cloak of Invisibility. This one I thought is really cool because you can keep the cloak on, and what makes you invisible or not is putting the hood up or down. It says while wearing this cloak, you can pull its hood over your head to cause yourself to become invisible. So again, this is just going to be limited to the one person wearing the cloak. It can't be used for multiple people. While you are invisible, anything you're carrying or wearing is invisible with you. You become visible again when you cease wearing the hood, and pulling the hood up or down requires an action. This only works for a certain amount of time though. You have to keep track of how many minutes you are invisible and deduct that from the maximum duration of 2 hours. So this cloak will only work for 2 hours until it's kind of recharged in a sense. It says after 2 hours of use, it ceases to function. For every interrupted period of 12 hours, it will get an hour back. So if you don't use it for 24 hours, you'll get the 2 hours back. Or if you don't use it for 12 hours and then use it again, it'll have an hour's worth of invisibility on it again. That's pretty cool. Now, this Cloak of Invisibility is actually found in the Dungeon Master's Guide, not as a magic item in the Player's Handbook with the basic rules, so it may be up to your Dungeon Master whether or not they're going to actually have this in the adventure or have you find it. Adventurers, if you love all things Dungeons & Dragons, tips, tricks, unboxings, and reviews, make sure you hit the subscribe button and that notification bell so you don't miss any of my upcoming epic videos. Now, the way invisibility works is obviously you can't be seen, but that does not mean that you can't be heard or that the tracks you're leaving behind can't be seen. If you happen to be walking around outside on the ground or in the mud, your tracks are still going to show up. Or even if you're walking on a hard surface, on a road or in a castle, and there's dust on the floor, maybe you've even just walked through a puddle or some dampness or something that was dripping on the ground, you're going to leave marks on the floor. And again, anything you move around or do, you can still hear your footsteps if it's really quiet. And if you knock something over, obviously that's going to make noise. So moving around while invisible is still going to require stealth checks on your part, depending on how noisy your surroundings are and who's paying attention to what you're doing. Now, the stealth checks that you're going to be required to make are against the opposing creature's perception. Now, doing the research for this video, I found a lot of different opinions on the way those perception checks are made. And again, I'm going to say that it's up to the Dungeon Master how they want to do things at their table. Now, often the stealth check is against a creature's passive perception. That does not require a roll. It's just a score that's part of their stats. So the invisible creature is going to make a stealth roll and add any modifiers and any bonuses that they have. And that number is going to be compared to the opposing creature's passive perception number, which does not require a roll. Now, in certain circumstances, the Dungeon Master actually might want to compare it to the creature's perception and make a roll for their perception score. In my opinion, if I was Dungeon Mastering, I would take into account whether or not that creature was actively looking for the invisible person. Say they're a jail guard sitting on a chair with a ring of keys on their side, and you're invisible and you're trying to sneak in and get those keys. Now, they're not, as long as your stealth roll is higher than, I would say, their passive perception, because they're not really aware that you're there and they're not really aware that you're trying to sneak up and grab these keys, I would use passive perception in that instance. But if you're standing right in front of a creature and they see you go invisible, and then they're actively trying to look for you to figure out where you went to try to see if they can hear you or see if you're leaving any footprints behind, honestly, I would use a regular perception roll and not the passive perception in that instance. So as long as your stealth is higher than one of those scores, then the creature is not going to be able to figure out where you are. Adventurers, do me a favor, if you're really getting value out of this video and enjoying it, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button, give us a like, it helps support the channel more than you know. Now, despite being invisible, there are definitely some ways around dealing with players that have gone invisible, if you're the Dungeon Master, or creatures that are invisible, if you are the players. First off, we have the See Invisibility spell. Now, this is a second level spell that's available to sorcerers, wizards, bards, and artificers. See Invisibility is a casting time of 1 action, but the range is self, so you can only cast it on yourself, not other players. The duration is an hour. So it says, for the duration, you see invisible creatures and objects as if they were visible. You can also see into the ethereal plane, and ethereal creatures and objects appear ghostly and translucent. Another situation that might occur that works kind of around the invisibility is there are creatures in Dungeons & Dragons that either have blind sight or true sight. Now let's check out the Player's Handbook and see what these mean. So on page 183 of the Player's Handbook, and this is under the chapter on adventuring, And under the section on the environment and the subsection on vision and light, it says that a creature with blind sight can perceive its surroundings without relying on sight within a specific radius. So there are creatures, it says, without eyes, like oozes, or creatures that have heightened senses like bats and even dragons have this sense. And blind sight is going to mean that even if you are invisible, they don't need to see you to know where you are. Now the next page has true sight on it. And true sight says, a creature with true sight out to a specific range can see in normal or magical darkness, see invisible creatures and objects, and automatically detect visual illusions and succeed on saving throws against them. It perceives the original form of a shape changer or a creature that was transformed by magic, and they can see into the ethereal plane. So a creature with true sight, even if you are invisible, can still see you. Now this may seem like it doesn't come up very often, but I actually went on D&D Beyond's website, went to the monster area and did a search for creatures that have the blind sight ability, and then another search for the creatures that have the true sight ability. And I'll tell you, across all the source books that Dungeons & Dragons has available, there were about 6 pages of creatures that have each of those types of abilities. And like I said, remember, it comes up with dragons, so don't think you're going to go invisible and sneak around that dragon. They will know you are there for sure. So what are the advantages of actually being invisible? Not only can you maybe sneak past someone and grab something, or do a task that you didn't want anybody seeing you doing, or even listen to people that don't know you're there, there's a pretty big advantage to being invisible when it comes to combat. Now, I know we said the minute you make an attack or cast a spell, it's going to make the invisibility end. But before that actually happens, the invisibility is going to give you advantage on your attack. So you're going to be able to roll 2 attack dice and use the higher one. It also gives anyone trying to attack you disadvantage. It's kind of like they're not really able to figure out where you are, and they can make a guess. And if they guess wrong, they're going to automatically miss. But if they happen to guess right, they do still have disadvantage on that attack. So they're going to be rolling 2 attack dice and be forced to take the lower one. The other great thing about being invisible is a lot of spells that someone might decide to try to attack you with literally say in the description that you have to be able to see the target. So automatically, if they cannot see you, they cannot even target you with that spell. This includes things like magic missile that there's normally no way to avoid. It actually says in the description, a target that you can see, and they can't see you. Now, the other great thing that invisibility can do when it comes to combat is assist you in getting surprise. Any creature or monster that doesn't notice a threat is surprised at the start of an encounter. And any surprised creatures, when it's their turn in the first round of combat, can't move, can't take actions, and can't take reactions. So they kind of essentially get their turn skipped while everyone else who's not surprised gets to go. Now it's time for the epic question of the day. I want to know if you have any more questions about how invisibility works. If I know them, I'll answer them, and if I don't, I'll find out. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any more questions about how invisibility works. Next, you're going to want to check out my How to Play playlist of videos that you can find on the next screen, full of more tutorials. Make sure you go ahead and click on that, and I will see you in those videos. Now go have an epic adventure.